Good morning, everybody. Let's try that again. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, you all stayed up too late by the bonfire, right? Well, let's get started because I can talk for hours on this topic, and those who know me know I do. So today, we're going to talk about adding the end user to the design, development, and evaluation of communication BCIs. And I thought we'd start by telling you about the road that I traveled to get to this meeting. So here's my trajectory. I am a speech pathologist with a PhD in psycholinguistics. I refer to myself as a rehab scientist. I joined the Rehab Engineering Center for Communication Enhancement at Tufts New England Medical Center in 1979. And at that point, we were making the first communication devices for children who weren't speaking. This is me. I look the same, right? For those of you who are in speech science, this communication device used single phonemes that we purchased from Texas Instrument for $1,000 a phoneme. And then we concatenated them to make whatever words we could afford. So we certainly have moved quite a difference since then. This is also the time when the Apple IIe came out. And we used that machine to design communication devices for children. We didn't yet call the field assistive technology. In fact, at one point it was called non-speech communication, but we were relying on speech as well. And then non-vocal communication, but vocalizations are fine. So we came up with a new name called augmentative and alternative communication. And in 1984, a multidisciplinary group of people who were interested in this topic formed the International Society for AAC. Now, there are chapters all around the world, including in most of the cities or most of the countries where you live. So if you're interested in finding out if there's a chapter where you live, please see me during the meeting and we can look it up. In 1985, we moved from Boston to Portland, Oregon. And at that point, I started AAC clinic. We established an adult AAC clinic for people with complex communication needs who could not use speech or writing for expression. Whenever we couldn't find a solution for communication, we started a research project to design, iteratively develop and evaluate a new assistive technology for communication. And most importantly, the individual with complex communication needs was always a member of the clinical research team. Here's the 2008 team. Well, you know a little bit now about who I am. If you're interested in our BCI work, we have 6 posters and a workshop. But today, I want to talk about the bigger picture. And the bigger picture, I will argue, here's my premise. Our future communication technologies must be designed and evaluated based on principles for end user involvement. And there are 3 principles we're going to learn about together today. They are values from the field of augmentative and alternative communication, user-centered design, and participatory action research. And I am honored to share this podium with 4 end users. So we have videos of the end users telling us what they think is their role in research and development. It gets me off the hook a little from talking. So let's define some terms so that we're all using the same vocabulary. The first thing we need to talk about is what is augmentative and alternative communication. It refers to all of the ways that someone communicates besides talking. One of our presenters today will refer to this as physiologic speech. AAC is any tool, method, or support used by a person who cannot rely on speech alone to be heard or understood by others. I always say all of us are using AAC. If you want to talk to the person next to you while I'm speaking, you will use a form of AAC because you'll take out your phone and type a message or you'll write something down. So you're using an alternative form of communication. People may use AAC all of the time, most of the time, or episodically. People of all ages can use AAC when their ability to vocalize is either temporarily or permanently interrupted. AAC is not only a means of expression, it is so much more than technology. It's a process that includes message sharing between people using many forms and is based on the needs and the preferences of the AAC user. Who uses AAC? Anyone who cannot rely on spoken or sign language alone to be heard and understood, regardless of age, cognitive or physical ability, or community language. There are an estimated 5 million individuals in the U.S. who experience disabilities and other conditions that impact their ability to rely on speech alone to be heard and understood. Some are born with limited speech or no ability to speak, and some experience speech-related disabilities at later stages of life. And in my clinic, I'd had the opportunity to work with individuals at all different levels. The thing about AAC is we started as a small group. In 1986, we went to a conference in Denver, and on the marquee of the hotel, it said, "Welcome, argumentative communication." And all of us can argue. Communication BCI is considered a recent form of AAC, and it's a new way to access language. So that's how BCI fits within the AAC community. And based on what Mariska said yesterday, I think it would be a great relationship between the International Society for AAC and the BCI Society. So I'll be talking to her further about that. So now that you understand what AAC is, let's talk about a few values that we strongly support. First, communication is not a luxury. It's an immutable part of life and a fundamental right. Everyone can communicate. Everyone does communicate. One cannot not communicate. Everyone is a candidate for AAC. Life is the only prerequisite. Everyone is an AAC user in one sense. Really important as a foundation for this field. We have two major AAC goals. The first is to participate in one's daily life to one's fullest capabilities. And the second is to facilitate the lived experience of daily participation with technology and communication alternatives. Let's move, now that we have a definition of what AAC is and some of our values. Within the bigger field where AAC fits, we also talk about the values of ableism. Ableism is a system of discrimination and prejudice against people with disabilities that can be conscious or unconscious. It's based on the idea that people with disabilities are less valuable, less capable, or less worthy of respect from others. Ableism can be embedded in institutions, systems, and cultures. One of the assumptions is that people need to be fixed. Another assumption is treating people as if they are not equals. People with disabilities are often not taken seriously or treated as equals to normal people. It's perpetuating negative stereotypes. The media often portrays people with disabilities as not as inspirational. Look what this person can do, rather than just normal human beings. You know, saying, oh, this is my OCD that's bothering me, that's a form of ableism, especially when there are individuals with OCD where that's their challenge. Or saying someone someone's crazy, that would be another form of ableism, because there are individuals with mental illness for whom that is their experience. So be careful with your language. It's conscious and unconscious. Ableism creates inaccessible environments, especially for meetings or for events that often exclude participants. And we make assumptions where we assume people have to have a visible disability to be actually disabled. One thing that the developmental disability community, one of their mantras is nothing about me without me. And that fits very strongly for what we're talking about today. One of the reasons that we have ableism so strong is the paradigm of what is a disability. And that is within the medical model of disability. The medical model of disability says disability is a deficit or a problem within the patient that needs to be cured or solved. That there's a physical, sensory, mental impairment and a chronic illness that cause the disability, and that the individual must be fixed to reduce the disability. We now are looking toward the social model of disability that says the physical and social environment creates barriers that make the individual's life more difficult. So we are creating the barrier, which is the disability. Attitudes about disability create prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination that lead to inaccessibility to meet life's challenge. We have to fix those attitudes, buildings, services, and languages, not fix the individual, to reduce disability. So within the end user community, we're no longer using the medical model. We do say an individual has an impairment, but it's not the impairment that's causing the disability. Another term we need to talk about is user-centered design. And this audience, this is the one that you should feel the most comfortable with, especially the standards community. So user-centered design is users of a proposed product influence how it takes shape. Your vision could be tomorrow's life-changing protocol. And within ISO, the International Standards Organization, there is a code for user-centered design. Human-centered design for interactive systems. And this provides requirements and recommendations for human-centered design principles and activities throughout the life cycle of computer-based interactive systems. It is intended to be used by those managing design processes, and it's concerned with ways in which both hardware and software components of interactive systems can enhance human-system interaction. There are 3 groups of users for user-centered design. We don't usually talk about all 3 groups. The first is the end user, the primary user. These are the people who actually use the product. These are the individuals with disabilities. The second group are those who may occasionally use the product or use it through an intermediary, so family members or caregivers. And how wonderful is it that the BCI Society now has a separate membership category for these individuals? And we all know how difficult it is to set up any BCI, and anyone who requires a BCI because of physical impairment is dependent on someone to help set up the system. So they are the secondary users. And then the tertiary users are those who will be affected by the use of the product and make decisions about its usefulness in order to fund or purchase the product. So this is the healthcare system, this is industry. There are 4 steps in user-centered design that those who do user-centered design know. The first step is that you have a context and a question that is identified. Then the user's requirements are specified. Design solutions are produced to meet the requirements. And finally, the designs are evaluated against the user's requirements. So really important. However, I don't see the user in that orange box too much. And that's my premise for today, that we have to start including the user at the questions. So in order to do that, we're going to look at participatory action research, also called, by the way, community-based participatory research, CBPR, for those of you who know that term. Participatory action research refers to people with disabilities should be allowed a more prominent and influential role in research at every stage of the process, but most especially in determining the questions that are worth asking. The goal is to give groups previously excluded from research and policy decisions a voice in these processes, and to recognize the formerly invisible contributions of these groups to the success of research and policy endeavors. PAR involves co-learning and reciprocal transfer of expertise by researchers and consumers alike. Shared decision-making power, and mutual ownership of the processes and products resulting from the research collaboration. Why do we include participants in research? Well, it improves researchers' awareness of and sensitivity to the questions, needs, and priorities of the consumers. It helps researchers pursue a relevant consumer-driven agenda. There's potential for increasing the research relevance, successfully recruiting and completing clinical research studies, knowledge translation, so taking our jargon from scientific articles and having a plain language version, adoption of effective interventions at the community level, so more adherence, and increasing the social validity of our work. Now we're going to go through this model for participatory action research. There are 5 different stages. So the first stage is agenda setting. This is where we look at what should be our priorities and what are the questions that we should be asking. Individuals with disabilities are the experts. We are not the experts. Individuals with disabilities should sit on our advisory boards. They attend our annual meetings and they provide input. I'd like to introduce you to our first interview. It's with Patrick Regan, who lives up in Alaska. He is the president-elect of the United States Society for AAC.
Thank you for talking with me about this important topic. I am 30 years old and I have been using augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, for 28 years. I have a neuromuscular condition called spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA type 2. I spoke using my physiological voice when I was very young. But I received a tracheostomy when I was 2 years old because I had sleep apnea following a hospitalization and intubation. And I was not able to speak after that because I could not tolerate the speaking valve. I received my first high-tech speech-generating device when I was about 2.5 years old. I have been using a computer with speech software on it for meetings. When I am sitting up, I cannot use the trackball, so I use eye gaze. My eye gaze speech generating device is an eye gaze edge by LC Technologies. LC Technologies has become eye gaze incorporated. When I received my eye gaze device, I began using Grid 3 software instead of Dynabox. Trackballing is becoming more difficult for me because of weakness and contractures in my hand. But I cannot use eye gaze for meetings because I split the screen and have Grid 3 on one side of the screen and the meeting software on the other side of the screen so that I can see the speech software and the meeting software at the same time. I have to use one monitor for both because I cannot turn my head. Unfortunately, the eye gaze does not calibrate to only one side of my screen. So, I can't use it for meetings. I think that end users should be involved in all of the phases of research, development, and evaluation for assistive technologies for communication, because our needs are what is driving the research and development in the first place. I think that end users need to be involved in the design process from the beginning. Our needs are what should drive the design. I imagine that research and development of technology is expensive. So, I assume that a designer will want to be as efficient as possible and avoid having to redo any of the design, if possible. Also, I expect that the designer will want to design a product that is useful for the broadest range of people possible. Although people who need assistive technologies for communication have in common that we experience speech disabilities, the causes of those speech disabilities are diverse. And we have a wide range of skills and challenges that complicate our access to communication and technology, even within the same underlying condition. The designer needs to understand the causes and mechanics of the speech disabilities, and the supports that we need to access the technologies, in order to design technologies that would be most widely useful and accessible. The designer needs to be aware of and informed in the barriers, and also the abilities within the target disability groups. For example, people with SMA experience tightness in our jaws, and many have respiratory insufficiency, which affects the breath support needed for speech. We also have physical challenges, direct selection due to muscle weakness. And many of us, like me, have to use an on-screen keyboard, typing one letter at a time, like someone hunting and pecking with a single finger. On the other hand, some people who experience autism are able to type with two hands, and they are able to switch to using their AAC when their physiological voices are unavailable to them. End users might also know about idiosyncrasies that the designer isn't aware of. For example, my friends and I participated in a research project interview with a person who was designing a virtual platform specifically for people who use AAC. We told her that it is really important for the captioning to be as accurate as possible, because captioning tends to do a poor job of picking up AAC voices. And we explained to her that it was very important to us to have accurate captioning, because we have friends who are deaf and hard of hearing. And we want them to be able to understand what we are saying. In almost every opportunity that I have to talk with researchers, I make sure to mention captioning as important to AAC users. It is something that doesn't always occur to people. And some people haven't had the experience of trying to use captioning to understand what an AAC user is saying. The designer also needs to know about all possible end users. I attended a webinar on brain interface technology, and the design was being tried out on people who experience ALS. It occurred to me that SMA has some similarities to ALS in that it affects motor neurons, and it is often referred to as infantile ALS. So I asked if people who experience SMA might be a population that could be included in trials. But many people are not aware that there are adults living with SMA. Those adults, and in particular those who experience the most severe form of SMA, could benefit from brain interface control of their speech devices. People with type 1 SMA have very little movement except for their eyes. I think that brain interface would change their lives for the better. Identifying not just a few groups that could benefit, but all groups that might benefit from the product could lead to greater success. As technology improves and becomes more sophisticated, there are more possibilities for improving access to speech for people who experience speech disabilities. End users should be involved in the ongoing development of devices and technologies for communication, all along in the process, for the same reasons that we should be involved in the design. I would think that it would be much less expensive and time-consuming to have a process for end users to consult during the development phase, rather than have to back and fix or adapt something.
A lot to learn from Patrick. So we move to the second phase of participatory action research. This is the design phase. In the design phase, we are looking at inclusion of stakeholders in the decision-making to increase the ecological validity and acceptability of the intervention and significantly help with inclusion-exclusion criteria, outcome measures, and recruitment of the study population. And I'd like to introduce you now to Endeavor Corbin.
I'm a Spanish-speaking autistic adult, and I have been using apps on my iPad to help me communicate for 7 or 8 years now. Life is so much better than before I had this assisted technology. I like to save long paragraphs in my spelling-based app. For example, when I give presentations about being Spanish-speaking and autistic. and I use a highly customized symbols-based app for more of my day-to-day communication with support workers and loved ones. My voice on both of those apps is based on my mouth words, created via the new iOS accessibility feature called Personal Voice. I also use IP text relay to place phone calls for medical care, and I type into Zoom's chat box for video calls related to the AC research I collaborate on. It's so amazing to actually be able to say what I want to say. Probably the most important thing for my success with assistive tech is for me to have autonomy over the details of it. I need to be able to switch between a range of communication technologies depending on my fluctuating disability traits and the situations I'm in. For example, I'm pretty fast with my symbols-based app, and that's in part because I've chosen the exact locations and visual cues for each word to make them easiest to remember. So that customizability works really well for me personally. I also really appreciate opportunities to interact with and give feedback to developers of the communication apps I use. Even in instances it doesn't result in direct impacts to my own usage, the general engagement feels meaningful for influencing communication supports in the future. From my point of view as an assistive tech user who works on participatory research teams, I can't overstate the importance of doing research and development within users involved at literally every step. And to me, this should include research around implementation and basic access, because ideas about what that's going to look like for the user and their support people should really be baked into the vision for a product from the outset. Best practices around privacy, accessibility, autonomy, and more should always be shaped by communities of current and prospective end users. This is going to improve new technologies' social validity as well as help advance disability justice principles in the field. I do say communities in the plural deliberately. Disabled people are not a monolith, but more of a Venn diagram, diverse groups of often multiply marginalized people who happen to use similar technology. All of those perspectives need to be incorporated into R&D, not just the perspective of those of us who are loudest or most well-known. When research is truly participatory, folks from all backgrounds and with all kinds of support needs are able to contribute their views and priorities every step of the way. Whenever that's not happening, I hope folks can at least start from a place of applying a lens of the social model of disability. The baseline assumption should never be that end users of assistive technology are simply incapable of contributing to research and development. Rather, look to the R&D process, protocols, procedures, and personnel to locate barriers to end user involvement. Those can be proactively addressed to get more of us in the door from the ground up. The technological successes developed via that kind of deliberately anti-ableist teamwork are increasingly likely to improve end users' health outcomes and quality of life.
So Endeavor certainly talks about autonomy, and us researchers, we don't have the lived experience of disability, and we must partner with people who do. Oh, stop. That takes us to the third process within participatory action research, and that's implementation. And that includes training staff and interventionalists, recruitment and retention, intervention delivery, and troubleshooting. Stakeholders may contribute to advertising about the study, recruiting participants, troubleshooting implementation problems, delivering the intervention. For our team, all research is conducted in the participants' residence or in their location of choice, for example. And now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Alyssa Zisk.
I am a mostly speaking part-time AAC user, and I found AAC in adulthood I've been using technologies that were actually designed for AAC use for about 12 years, mostly Proloquo for text and FlipWriter. I also pretty regularly use mainstream technologies that are relevant to my communication needs, just, for AAC reasons. My best multilingual speech generation option is eSpeak at the moment, which was not actually designed for AAC. So I finished my PhD in interdisciplinary neuroscience at the University of Rhode Island in May 2021. My dissertation was quantifying and compensating for P300 variations in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So working within user trial to trial variability in timing of the P300 response for the P300 speller. There's actually no overlap between the assistive technologies I use for my knee and the ones that I studied for my PhD. Not only do I not need a BCI, but also my sensory issues do not get along with the intensifications needed for P300 BCIs, so I can't. Describe the current role, I'm going to say wildly insufficient and leave it at that. Should be as much as the end user wants, up to and including getting the training to be the researcher in charge of the whole project. Hi. At the very least, what we want from the technology needs to guide the research and development priorities.
So as Dr. Zisk said, those of you who are working in the area of BCI and developmental disabilities, especially autism, please be very aware of the sensory challenges that the technology we are building creates. The next stage of participatory action research is dissemination. And this is dissemination to the scientific community, to the stakeholders and consumers, and to the public. Participants can help disseminate results to other stakeholders, such as healthcare providers, consumers, and the public. Stakeholders can assist in identifying additional modes of dissemination of results to the groups they represent, such as newsletters, blogs, industry publications. AAC users are presenters. Perhaps you recognize Greg Beaker, who was a member of our research community. He attended the 2018 Asilomar Conference. He was one of the speakers there. He traveled with us to the BCI meeting to present our most recent research results. He also is the author of articles, especially in magazines or journals that will be read by other users, families, and professionals. So here's an example of an article that he wrote, Brain-Computer Interface, Locked In, and Reaching New Heights. Greg has incomplete locked-in syndrome for 25 years now. Finally, I want to talk to you about the sustainability of participatory action research. These are the clinical services and programs, more importantly, policy and advocacy. Stakeholder involvement would lead to the generation of additional meaningful research agendas, priorities, and questions to tackle in the next phase of intervention research. They can translate research into lay language, advocate for products, show policymakers why we need to continue funding disability research, because it has affected their lives significantly, and it will affect the policy. Let me give you some examples of sustainability. In the US, we now have the Steve Gleason Enduring Voices Act. So Steve Gleason was a football player for the New Orleans Saints. And he now experiences ALS. He started a foundation which now has millions of dollars. There is a Team Gleason that helps people throughout the United States acquire assistive technology. He created policy that was voted on by the entire US Congress. The legislation permanently ensures that people living with diseases such as ALS can access speech-generating devices regardless of their setting, whether at home or in a healthcare institution. The bill provides Medicare payment, so government payment, for communication devices and for accessories needed to allow the devices to work effectively. So this is a perfect example of participatory action research at the dissemination level. Here's another perfect example. SmartBox is an AAC company, and Patrick said he used Grid 3 as one of his softwares. SmartBox makes Grid 3. And they are working on a generative AI product for people who have ALS, and they came up with a manifesto of end-user foundational goals, such as respecting your rights. We only use AI in ways that protect your privacy, rights, dignity, and agency. We will seek to control biases and barriers that may disadvantage any group. We will keep humans in control of decisions. Risk management. Before we use AI in our products, systems, or services, we will perform a risk assessment. We will look at how the AI will be used, who it will affect, and what could go wrong. And transparency. We will be clear and honest about how and why we are using AI and clarify any limitations. You have the right to know what our AI is doing and how it affects you. There's a long list of the foundations for their products that are an example of the sustainability phase of participatory action research. Finally, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Bob Williams. Bob is a very significant disability and policy advocate for assistive technology in the US. He is the former commissioner for an agency within the US Department of Health and Human Services. That's where NIH sits. And he was in that role for about 12 years before our current president had his first administration, and then he resigned. He has a lot to say and to teach us about the role of end users in policy and advocacy.
Yeah.
I prepare most of what I say for any interview or presentation I do in advance, as an accommodation to myself, and, even more so for my audience, those who are hopefully listening and trying to understand what I am saying, as well as my perspective. People who have little to no understandable speech rely on a range and multiple modes of augmentative and alternative communication to express ourselves and to be understood. And what is seldom well understood is the tremendous toll we pay, expending incalculable amounts of physical, cognitive, and psychological energy and time doing so. And we pay an extraordinary high user tariff for doing so. While it pales in comparison, those we communicate and interact with are similarly adversely affected by this unacknowledged tax. Simply put, many do not understand us because of these factors. Sometimes speech-generating devices and similar technology can help lower that taxation. But it can, and does, often, exacerbate that burden several times over. The same is true of artificial intelligence when used by anyone with little to no self-directed movement. AI is great when it is tailored to an individual, on who they are, how they think, what drives them, how they express themselves, much of which I hope can be grounded on and reflected in small language models as well as, with the permission of the person, input from others they know and trust. When artificial intelligence is left to its own devices, however, I know myself it can lead to being sent down a rabbit's hole, as well as self-incrimination and being made to look less than, in our own eyes, the eyes of others, and society at large. As researchers, you need to figure out how your work can blunt rather than trigger such effects. AI, as we all know, is not perfect. It is going to screw up, and there is nothing you can do to anticipate and prevent 100% of those hellacious incidents. As researchers, though, you have both the opportunity and the obligation to explicitly focus on driving the taxation and error rates down as much as possible. That can only be done by recognizing that people like Pancho Ramirez, who put everything on the line to work with you, San Francisco, researchers to prove thoughts alone can be transformed into language, are not research subjects to poke, direct, and mold to conform to research protocols. No, they are your and my equals. They have knowledge and experience you do not, and quite frankly, will never have. Indispensable to your work, that you need to partner with, and be guided by. I am making these points up front because they help ground and frame much of what I need to convey. BWS response to question 1: what are your experiences? As you know, Mel, I rarely do what I am told or answer the precise question I am being asked. I want to start by saying the following about myself. I am 68 years old and was born with significant cerebral palsy. The way it continues to impact me the most by the fact that there has never been a time in my life and career when most people have understood what I say orally, readily, reliably, or entirely. And that has been true with regard to my parents, family, friends, teachers, classmates, roommates, lovers, my spouse, and stepchildren, co-workers, and the federal public servants I had the privilege to work with at HHS and SSA. But the exact opposite has also always been true. There has also never been a time in my life, even when I was a very young child, I could not and did not find a way to express myself and be understood. By smiling, gesturing, speaking words those around me could understand, changing the intensity of my pupils and gaze, answering yes or no questions by all means available. And I have been extremely lucky to have just enough physical dexterity to use a range of both assistive and ubiquitous technology, all of which started with me pecking away at an IBM typewriter as a child 60 years ago, to prove to others what my parents and brothers and sisters already knew. Bobby could read and write. And, unfortunate for you listening now, always has had a lot to say. Of course, many other people with minimal movement, or unreliable, or seemingly uncontrollable movement, have fewer natural and technology assisted ways of expression and being understood than you and I do. But of those I have known and advocated with, over the decades, many have found effective ways to connect and communicate with those around them, and exert all they have to communicate with those that fail or just refuse to understand. Or like the current HHS Secretary, debase autistic people, and by extension others with communication disabilities, as hopeless, and having nothing to say, do, or contribute. Such stereotypes are real, pervasive, and damning. And thanks to the tenor of our times, such biases and their consequences are metastasizing. Your job as BCI researchers, and mine as one who works to create social justice for all, have vital and similar roles to play in disrupting it. Specifically, we can do this by elevating the fact that all people express ourselves in multiple ways. That advances in brain science and related fields indicate that the brain is far more plastic and capable of rewiring than once assumed. And how human speech is produced and its relationships to other brain functions, particularly in respect to cognition, also appear to be different than what they have long been assumed to be. We must also seek to better understand and strengthen in real time the current strategies and tools people who might, or might not ever, benefit from the BCI research you and your colleagues conduct. To be clear, I see doing this as an ethical imperative on your part. If you are going to have people as partners, not just research subjects that your institutional review board nominally reviews, approves of, and which vouches their rights are not being violated, you must do more than provide them de minimis compensation or treat them well. While I am not going to touch on what all of this might entail, I will say this. Doing mere due diligence is never sufficient. It needs to begin with the respect and recognition that makes too clear to them, academe, and all others, that the intense blend of time, energy, mind-bending effort, and insight they invest in your research is integral to gathering new knowledge and identifying possible solutions. As such, I believe, you should further make it clear in writing that you and your team will seek to better understand and do what you can do to enhance and expand their right and power of expression, beginning immediately. As I said, I believe this is your ethical duty. I likewise believe it is central to the success of your work and what you hope to achieve through your research. I do not pretend to understand or fathom the intricacies of what you are studying. But based on my lived experiences and those of others with a range of early and later onset disabilities, I know, it is clear that many of us have a deep and deliberate way of expressing ourselves. And that gaining a greater understanding of what that entails and exploring how to leverage it is critical. Doing the basic research you are engaged in is never easy, nor as well understood or as valued as it should. That is recklessly truer today than at other in recent memory. Some of what I have said is unapologetically strident, and from my vantage point necessarily so. But believe me when I say I view the work you do as vital to those you seek to assist, and to reveal the humanity that is intrinsic to all of us, and that all of us can embrace, practice, and reciprocate in, if we choose. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. 2 years ago in Brussels, I was able to be part of the clinical outcomes assessment panel. At that time, I provided this heuristic to discuss COAs for communication BCIs. I hold this heuristic still valid, and I suggest that the end user is involved in most of those COAs. So, in our hour together, I hope I argued that our future communication technologies must be designed and evaluated based on the principles of AAC values, user-centered design, and participatory action research. My team and I thank you for the honor of opening up the scientific sessions here. Have a good conference.
Perfect. Thanks so much. We have about 15 minutes before the workshops open up, so happy to answer a couple questions if anybody. I see someone already over there. Do we have a microphone that we can run over? If you want to just stand up and say loudly, that's also great.
Thank you so much for this inspiring talk. I have actually a couple of questions, if I may. The first one is, so the people that you showed us in these very inspiring videos are able to communicate very fluently. Like, it takes time for them, I guess, to prepare this in advance, but they are able to do so. So I'm interested to hear your tips and approach to how you would get this feedback that is so important, I guess, from users. How do you do that with people that have a much lower ability to communicate, either due to cognitive impairment or due to a very low
That's an excellent question. And for those of you who couldn't hear, the interviews I held were with individuals who could communicate fluently. And what about those who cannot communicate fluently? And do I have suggestions on how to work with that? I think it starts with attitudes of providers, insurers, and policy. I think it takes a long time. I think training and intervention with any assistive technology is critical. I don't think we can put a communication BCI in front of someone and expect them to communicate immediately. But we do have researchers here who will be presenting during the week who will show that those with much more severe physical impairment and locked-in syndrome can use BCI fluently as well.